Welcome back. You're listening to KHTS, your hometown station, 98.1 and 1220 AM. This is Matt Watson with Amber Raskin, and you're listening to Eye on the Valley's Homeschooling Answers. As I was mentioning before the break, we've got a very special guest joining us on the phone this morning, and I'd like to bring her in. She's quite an amazing person with an incredible backstory. Kristina de Bree is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California with a private practice here in Valencia. She's a graduate of Pepperdine University who did her undergraduate work at CSUN. Go Matadors. She furthered her studies in EMDR, trauma, complex trauma, phobias, performance enhancement, attachment disorders, motivation, self-harm, suicide prevention, grief, chronic and terminal medical illness, child and adolescent intervention, and effective parenting techniques. She's been quite busy. Kristina is known for her commitment to patient advocacy and is an active community philanthropist through her consulting, speaking, fundraising, and event planning. Kristina has more than 18 years of experience speaking, and she regularly speaks and consults with medical professionals, organizations, patients, schools, parents, and business professionals. She focuses on helping individuals build, mend, and develop healthy relationships and authentic connections with others and with themselves. Kristina believes that the core of every working relationship should be built on trust, authenticity, and quality. She brings a deep value and care for the patient experience, believing that change is made through relationships that are trusting, caring, and safe. Good morning, Kristina. Welcome in.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing great. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's funny, as even before I started to introduce you, just kind of talking about you before the break, I started getting text messages about people that want your phone number. People need help out there, which is why we brought you in. Before we get too deep into it, though, I want to start with what you do. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your practice? Where are you? Who do you work with? What do you specialize in? Or do you just kind of run the gamut because you've studied quite a bit?
Okay. Well, my name is Kristina de Bree. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I am a EMDR, which is short for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing certified
Which is quite a
therapist.
mouthful. What is that?
Yes. So that's all. I'm happy to talk about that. Do you want me to just transition into talking about that briefly?
What? No. We can get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
Keep talking about your practice. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, it's okay. So I specialize really in trauma and grief in my practice. My two subspecialties are medical illnesses and sexual trauma, but I see a wide range of individuals in my practice. On the, the more easier level, it's people who, hey, I have an anxiety about driving in the car and I need EMDR so that I can drive again. On the other end of it, I work with people with dissociative identity disorder and borderline personality disorder and so on and so forth. So I do really see a wide range. I work with kids, teens, and adults.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned EMDR. Can you kind of sum that up in a nutshell? I was looking it up over the weekend, and it does seem pretty deep and heavy.
So, yeah, it is a little bit difficult to sum up, but essentially EMDR is an 8-phase protocol. And what we know in EMDR is that our minds already have a natural information processing system, right? So think of it like a freeway. Okay, so as information is coming in, the cars are coming on the freeway, and then they're driving to their destination, right, which is where they're going to live, right?
Right.
And so what happens is if a lot of overwhelming information or too much information comes in at one time, you get traffic jams, car accidents, right?
Yeah.
Lanes can be shut down. It makes travel difficult, right?
Yep.
And then cars can get stuck there, right?
Yep.
So that's how information can be in our brains, is that as information's coming in, if it's too much, too soon, too overwhelming, then things get stuck, right? So what EMDR does is it capitalizes on your brain's natural information processing, and it takes components and breaks it down into individual memory components, such as the smell of something, or the specific emotion, or where you're feeling that experience in your body, and uses this 8-phase protocol to help clients reprocess it to get that car going on the freeway and off to its destination.
Wow,
So.
that is quite a metaphor, but it totally makes sense to me. At least as an educator, we see how kids process information and how we can get those traffic jams. So you're kind of like the Caltrans cleanup crew when things normally flow like they do on the highway, but sometimes when we do get traffic jams or lane closures, you help to get in there and unclog things and get those thoughts and memories going where they need to go.
Kristina, does it like you're kind of? It sounds like, and I'm asking the question, but I'm saying it as a statement. It's like you're reprogramming the triggers, right?
Well, yes. So reprocessing. I explain to my clients, really what we're doing is we're recalibrating the central nervous system to get it to get information to flow. So I give, like I'll say, instead of shoving the whole cake in your mouth and trying to eat that, where, then we might be throwing up and having diarrhea and whatever, we're taking small slivers or individual bites so that we can process it, right? We don't want to overload it. Another metaphor is, I don't know if they still have these days, but those coin sorters, like when you were a kid and you had coin sorters, if you put too many coins in it at one time, it jams it, right? And then some of the coins go in the wrong places, right? You have to do one at a time. So one of the things that happens, think of the Saugus shooting or what's going on right now with COVID. Any of these kind of things is so much information that it overloads the information processing system and it engages the stress response. And so things get stuck. And when things get stuck, it causes secondary problems like anxiety, depression, staying in a triggered state of stress. And then you start making choices from that state of stress, and your behavior is influenced by that.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Kristina, I want to back up a little bit for our listeners. You and I got to know each other last week, and you've got an amazingly inspiring story. And you actually reached out to us with the idea that not only your professional expertise, but your personal story might be able to help our listeners, perhaps even more so than just your clinical expertise. Although we're going to tap into a lot of that as well. So will you share a little bit about your personal story with our audience?
Absolutely. So I was born in 1986 with a genetic condition called cystic fibrosis. So for those who don't know, it is a terminal genetic illness, and it involves a malfunction of a protein which causes the body to produce abnormally thick and sticky mucus. And it is a terminal disease. So it impacts the respiratory tract the worst, the respiratory and digestive tract the worst. So ultimately over time it destroys the lungs, it destroys a lot of other organs, and then the treatments that were given to deal with that often destroy other organs as well, like kidney and liver.
So the treatment itself can also cause damage. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so when I was born, I was not expected to live past my teenage years. So I was diagnosed at 6 weeks of age. I was transferred to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, and they told my parents, you'll be lucky if she lives through her teenage years. Wow. And so, and then I basically, at that time, there was nothing to treat the core cause of the disease. It was all just symptom management. Okay. And so I essentially would live in hospitals for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. I'd come out for short periods of time and then go back. And that was my life. And, things just continued to progress. When I was 15, I had enough damage to my pancreas that I became a type 1 diabetic.
Oh, wow.
So I'm also a type 1 insulin-dependent diabetic. And really just in high school, all throughout my life, when I was in high school, my life expectancy was in my 20s. When I was in my 20s, my life expectancy was in my 30s. And so I really, I spent more time, thinking about my funeral than thinking about my wedding as a kid. And, wondering who would be there and what it would be like and how I wanted it to be. And so I oftentimes lived in quarantine and isolation in hospital rooms because I was super high risk for infections. I've been through, many years of this. And through it all, really, I poured myself into my education, my training, and I was living in trauma. I had PTSD for over 20 years. I dealt with secondary anxiety and depression. And so, that's what led me to be a mental health professional. And I was able to eradicate my own PTSD diagnosis after 20 years when I discovered EMDR, and I went to find an EMDR therapist. And then in my late 20s, early 30s, I knew, okay, I'm going to die. I was living with my parents. I just wanted to live the best that I could, and that got harder and harder because some days I would just be laying in bed, and just even to get up and go to the bathroom was, too much for me. It felt like running a marathon. So I knew that my only chance at life was to find a clinical research study. And even though that was dangerous, I could either face certain death or maybe death. And so I chose maybe death. And I got into a clinical trial. The first one lasted 3 years, and it didn't improve me, but it kept me stable. And then that was discontinued the week that I opened my own private practice, and I was absolutely devastated. And then that year afterwards, I had just met my husband at that time. I was just unraveling significantly. My health was deteriorating. I was looking for another trial to get in, but nothing was available. And then I was able to get in this trial for a medication called Trikafta, which has since been FDA approved. And during the trial, I didn't know it at the time, but I know now I had the placebo.
Wow.
My husband, he proposed to me. We were not sure I was going to live long enough to see our wedding day. We weren't sure if we should have a wedding. But we continued anyways. We continued to plan a wedding, and we continued to do our best to live the best life that we could. And then on February 5th of 2019, the trial ended, and I got what's called open label. So open label is when you finish the 3-phase clinical trial, but then you are given the drug as a courtesy, and they still continue to monitor you.
Okay.
So within 24 hours, I knew that I had this drug, and it completely changed my life. And even though technically it's not a cure, it eradicated 90% of my symptoms.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so I'm still a type 1 diabetic, but I haven't been in the hospital since starting this medication. I've been able to go off 2/3 of my medications. And so I got married, and yeah.
And celebrated your 34th birthday just last week?
Yes. So
Fantastic.
my 34th birthday was last week. So, I went from, probably not going to live through my teenage years to celebrating my 34th birthday alive and well.
Wow.
And welcome to a pandemic.
Right? Well, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I want to apologize. I think a spring breeze blew through the studio here because both Amber and our eyes have just started watering quite a bit. What an amazing story.
That's incredible. And
Yeah.
your outlook, your mindset is incredible. Like, to live through that kind of trauma your entire life is just, I have a niece that has mitochondria disorder, and she was not expected to live past 4, and she's now 8. And every year is a gift, and we've had to look at her life in the same way that you've had to look at yours. And talking to you as a married adult, it's Matt was very much understating the tears. It's incredible, and most importantly, what's incredible is your commitment to the quality of your life, no matter how long it is. What a beautiful thing!
Well, definitely. When being told that it's not going to last much longer, and you're working on your college degree and your master's and studying all these different topics, and not just for you, you're doing it so that you can help yourself and help others. So inspiring. So inspiring. So you did mention that you grew up and spent a lot of your childhood, your teenage and early adult years kind of in quarantine. So what periods of time are we talking about? How long were you in the hospital or had to stay at home? Did you have to do, what was school like for you? What was that like?
So I used to go in when I was younger for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. And then when I was 5 years old, so that was starting at 6 weeks of age was when I was diagnosed.
Okay.
So this has been since I was a baby. And I used to go into 6 to 8 weeks at a time, having surgeries, having procedures. And then when I was 5, I got a portacast inserted, which is allows them to access a central line, and I was able to do a lot of treatments at home. So then when I could, I would go to school with my IVs. I mean, just to put this in perspective, every single semester of undergraduate and graduate school, I was hospitalized and doing infusions.
Wow.
Every single semester. And so I would go in, and then I'd come out, and I'd have my infusions, and I'd bring my infusions to school with me. And I would just wear baggy sweatshirts and do what I can. I'd, get my IV going while I was taking final exams.
Wow.
And some people were understanding about it. Some people were not understanding about it because I don't look sick. It's definitely an invisible illness. So unless you see the IV connected to me, and then you're kind of confused, what is that? And that was how I lived my life.
My niece has dealt with that her whole life too, because she wears her food in a backpack that she walks around with. So I don't know. You go to Disneyland and you want to take a picture, and the photographer's like, "Take off your backpack." No, that's keeping her alive. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people so quickly judge at first glance. You don't look sick. You don't look handicapped. You don't look this. But get to know me, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
So, so you're going to school. You're going to college. You're doing the things that normal kids do, but unlike normal kids, well, at least up until last week, you had extended periods of time where you had to stay home, where I'm sure you were missing out on a lot of social activities, whether it's sports or school dances and things like that. How did you cope with all that stuff growing up?
It was a challenge. I had a lot of years to learn how to cope with it, and it was different for me at different points in my life, right? So when I was a younger child, the more superficial things were upsetting to me. Like, hey, I used to play soccer, and then I wasn't allowed to play soccer anymore. I wasn't allowed to play any contact sports because of the risk. And so that was really upsetting for me. And so it was grieving, learning how to grieve. And then there's this other piece of it, too, of the trauma of I was undergoing really traumatic medical procedures. So I had PTSD on top of it. So it was a lot of times spending holidays in the hospital, spending birthdays in the hospital, or even when I was at home, just not being well enough to go out, or it was too risky. I mean, every flu season is a danger.
Yeah.
So it's, hey, we don't go to Disneyland for 6 months out of the year, or whatever it is. Being extremely strategic, mastering infection control, learning, how to always sneeze into, the side of your arm, or open doors. I carry gloves with me in my car. You know, I'm that person that's always, not just in this COVID situation, but I'm always using gloves at the gas station. People kind of stare at me like I'm a weird OCD person. It's like, well, you know, it's functional paranoia. Like,
What a great
it
phrase.
could kill me.
Right. So you're darn right I'm a germaphobe. Yeah. Wow. So let's talk about, because you've mentioned some things that a lot of our families are, I can't read that. A lot of our families are going through some of the same things that you talked about. What should we do about our wedding? Or, okay, we can't go to Disneyland now, and I love sports, but I can't play right now. It was a little bit different for you because your situation was a little bit more permanent. This is more temporal. I have spoken with people over the last couple of weeks that have canceled or postponed weddings and things like that. So, but when we're talking about families that this is a little bit more temporal for, but no less traumatic, you know, you mentioned that superficial stuff. What tips can we give for kids that are finding themselves all of a sudden?
Like strategies. What strategies did you use when you were stuck at home to stay, you know, sane and to cope with some of the mourning that you were doing for the things you couldn't do? And what do you think would be useful for some of our people at home?
So one of the really important things was to hold space for the grief, for the trauma. A lot of times we want to say, yeah, but it's temporary, or yeah, but everyone else is in your situation. Or we want to say, at least this, at least you live in this nice house, at least we have food. And the problem is that takes away a holding space for the emotions. So what's important is when someone's expressing anger, frustration, sadness, grief, you want to say, I know, it's sad. You're right, it's sad. It's not fair.
So validate.
And you have validate
their feelings.
Don't say but or at least. Just that's it. You know, let's spend some time being sad about it together.
We talked about empathy on the show last week, and that is so important. You know, when your kids come to you and say, and some of my listeners may have to excuse the phrase, but this is the way it goes down at my house. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, you're right. It does suck.
Yep.
Let's keep moving forward.
Can I ask a question specifically about that? Because I know that being grateful is something that often pulls me out of my sadness about a given situation. So thinking about the things that we do have. And I think that what you said as part of your tip is a very valid point. Don't invalidate the sadness or the trauma that they're going through by focusing on being grateful too soon, I would imagine. But could you elaborate on that distinction a little bit so that we can understand which one is appropriate?
So you always want to do that first, right? And so sometimes what I do when I'm working with kids is I'll set a timer on my phone, right? I'll say, let's spend 5 minutes being really sad and angry about this, right? I'll let that timer go for 5 minutes. And then at the end of the 5 minutes, I'll say, do you think we need another 5 minutes, or are we okay for now? And then once they get to the point, and let them do that 5 minutes as long as they need to, right? Because you're giving permission.
Okay.
And if you give permission, it typically will go for shorter periods of time than if you tell them not to do it. And then after that, you say, you know, instead of saying, what are you grateful for? Another way to think about it is if you woke up tomorrow with only the things that you were grateful for today, what would you have, right?
Okay.
Because then it helps reframe it, and it's easier to tap into, right?
Yeah, definitely. So important. And, you know, this is where my brain goes because I'm a teacher. How do you feel about also allowing kids to write those feelings down? You want to take 10 minutes and go journal about it? Do you want to take a few minutes to just sit down and write it? Or is it more beneficial to talk it out?
So talking and writing isn't necessarily going to make it better, right? Because that actually can sometimes make it worse, right? So doing something more artistic, is there a song that we can listen to that you feel like could represent your sadness?
Oh, interesting.
Giving a hug, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a color in this crayon box that you feel like, represents your anger? Do you want to draw a picture of it, right? So we want to activate the right cortex of the brain.
All right. So that creative side, wow. Okay,
Which,
fascinating.
depending on the person, might be writing. Some people, that might feel very creative to them.
But generally speaking, sometimes writing about it can make it worse, so I say it with caution.
Okay.
If you feel like you're writing about it and it makes it feel worse, don't do that. Don't force your kids to write about it if they're, resisting, right? Say, is there a dance that you want to make to share this experience with me? Is there a sound you can make? Is there a chord on the piano or the guitar, or whatever instrument it is?
So there's that danger with writing of kind of taking you deeper into the depression.
I guess the difference would be, as I'm processing what you're saying, is that for young children, they're still learning to write. So it's hard to, it's a very much a left brain activity when you're still learning and practicing the skill. So forcing them to write when that doesn't come so easily to them, you're now adding another complication. Right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So
and
that's
then,
why whatever's creative to them seems to resonate when you say that to me, because as an adult, writing isn't so hard for me. So writing does help me sometimes, even though I'm not a big writer, because it kind of flows sometimes, depending. But the tip that I'm hearing you say that is so critical is that it needs to be creative, the creative expression of the feeling.
Well, you want to get into that right brain, right?
Yeah.
And you want to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So calm, soothing voice, validation, physical touch. Sometimes when people have trauma, like sexual trauma, they're not going to be calmed by physical touch, like a hug,
right,
or, like a back scratch or something like that. So you want to be mindful of that, but listening to music, taking slow, deep breaths in and out. I call it 7-7-7 breathing. 7 seconds inhale, 7 seconds hold, 7 seconds exhale for 7 times.
Can you say that one more time?
So I call it 7-7-7 breathing. It's a 7-second inhale. So usually I do it with my kids. I'll say, all right, let's inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I do it with them, right? So then you're doing co-regulation with them. Together as the adult, you are soothing yourself and helping them soothe themselves.
That's great.
Now, I want to shift here a quick second. You talked about how you missed soccer, and, I've got, Amber and I both have high school seniors at home that are really starting to stress as school districts and schools are announcing that our closures are going to last a little bit longer. Our seniors are starting to worry about, well, what about prom? Well, what about graduation?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you used or that you can suggest to our kids about, I guess replacement is the word. If, I'm a baseball player and this is baseball season, but I can't get out and play ball. And that was the most important thing to me. Is there something that I can do to replace that or those social activities? It's my senior year and Friday nights is what it's all about. And now Friday nights are, sorry, Amber, don't be offended, but mom and dad aren't the ones that our kids want to necessarily spend Friday nights with. Are there replacement activities that our kids can do?
So a couple of different things. One is sublimation, right? That's when you kind of take any of this anxious and aggressive energy and funnel it into something productive. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe it's, hey, I'm going to organize my closet, or hey, I'm going to write a book or make a comic book or draw a bunch of pictures. Taking that energy and sublimating it elsewhere at home.
Okay.
Also, something I did for myself and something that I think is important is make a plan for what you want to do when quarantine is over, right?
Okay.
So for me, it was, hey, I'd be in the hospital and I'm going to have a big birthday party, right? So one year I was at, Stanford University Hospital, and it was a really dark year. And it was just, lots of tears, lots of crying, lots of grief. And my mom and I sat together and we wrote out a plan to throw a Mad Hatter tea party at the house, right? And we got super detailed, right?
Okay.
We're having these different stations at the house, and each different room was a different land from Alice in Wonderland. And it got me excited, and it was something that I could look forward to. So create something that you can look forward to when this is all over.
Great idea.
Even my birthday was last weekend, and I was going to go to the Magic Castle for dinner. I had bought this gorgeous gown.
Right.
So, I put the gown on and, got my hair and makeup all done, and I'm at home. You can dress up. You can find ways. You have to tap into that inner child part of ourselves that can play fantasy and make believe. And, life goes on. And, the nice thing about this is that we're all in the situation together right now. So it's not like you get to watch other people going and having their prom when you don't get to have prom, like nobody's having prom right now.
Right.
And so, it's not fair for anyone, right? So make a plan for that. Hey, maybe I'm going to plan to, do this with 20 people, in July or whenever it is that this is done.
Okay. Super important. We do have to run. We have to take another quick commercial break, but I would love to have you back on. Are you maybe available to come back on next week?
Yes, absolutely.
That would be fantastic. And as I mentioned, I'm getting texts from people saying, how can I get her contact information? You mentioned before off the air, for those of us that would like maybe a teletherapy session or to reach out to Kristina to get some advice, whether it's working directly with her or getting pointed in the right direction. Her phone number is 661-513-4857. Now, Kristina, is that your direct line?
Yes, that's my cell phone number.
Oh, fantastic. And gosh, she's opening up her cell phone number for you guys to reach out to. So if you need some support during this difficult time or support with some of the trauma that you've been through, give her a call at 661-513-4857. We do have to take another quick commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about what to do when your child has a meltdown. Kristina, I want to thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back next week. You're listening to SCBI Charter School's Eye on the Valley, Homeschooling Answers. I'm Matt Watson with Amber Raskin on your hometown station,